Wraith of Injustice by Sarah J. Nilsson. This is the true story surrounding the death of Heidi Sue Dowland, born November 18, 1980, and tragically killed in a plane crash on January 13, 2019. Wraith of Injustice portrays the haunting and destructive consequences of injustice in the wake of the death of Heidi Sue Dowland. A wraith is a ghost that persists. Episode 4, FAA Oversight. The plane crash that killed Heidi Sue Dowland on January 13, 2019, occurred during a period of U.S. government sequestration. So no NTSB or FAA inspectors from the local FSDO, that's Flight Standards District Office, in Scottsdale, responded to the accident site. Once sequestration was over, Thomas Dickerson, now retired, was put in charge of investigating the plane crash on January 13, 2019, that took the life of Heidi Sue Dowland. The FAA promulgates CFRs, Code of Federal Regulations, under Title 14. The FAA employs inspectors to police the aviation community, educate and ensure compliance with these CFRs, as well as investigate infractions. The FAA also employs attorneys who go after airmen who violate said CFRs, and they then issue orders of suspension or revocation of their certificates, as well as issue fines. As I reviewed this crash, I came up with at least 8 different CFR violations. Firstly, there was the issue of Anderson, who held a combined student pilot and third-class medical certificate, carrying passengers on multiple occasions over a 5-year period from 2014 to 2019, in clear violation of 14 CFR 6189. Second, because Anderson had failed to replace the fuel caps on the tanks in Kingman that fateful morning, leading to fuel siphoning out, the engine losing power, and then crashing, killing Heidi, there was the question of airworthiness per 14 CFR 3.5. The FAA Airplane Flying Handbook requires the pilot to make a visual pre-flight assessment of the aircraft to ensure it is in a safe mechanical condition prior to flight. Furthermore, the FAA is adamant that no person may operate a civil aircraft unless it is in an airworthy condition. And this is the job of the pilot in command, a job Anderson failed at when he left the fuel caps off in Kingman. Third, the Airplane Flying Handbook outlines what items a pilot must have on board the aircraft before each flight. Among them is a current registration certificate. This regulation is outlined in 14 CFR 91203. No person may operate a civil aircraft unless the registration certificate is on board. Additionally, 14 CFR 473 requires that an aircraft be registered by the owner. But we know that from the time Heidi bought the plane for Anderson on October 30th, 2018, there was no registration. This is corroborated by the FAA. So all those flights between then and the crash on January 13, 2019 were conducted in violation of 14 CFR 91203. 4. So the day of the crash, the plane ran out of fuel. 14 CFR 91-151 was promulgated by the FAA to prevent such an event from happening. by requiring a pilot carry enough fuel from departure airport to destination airport, plus an additional 30 minutes worth during the day. Clearly, this regulation was violated when Anderson ran out of fuel, crashed the plane, and killed Heidi. 5. The FAA has promulgated a regulation that we attorneys affectionately call the catch-all one. 14 CFR 9113. Careless or reckless operation. No person may operate an aircraft in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life or property of another. I don't know about you, but I'd say Anderson operated the aircraft in a reckless manner so as to endanger the life of Heidi Sue Dowland. 6. A minor infraction, but an infraction nonetheless. 14 CFR 6160 requires the holder of a certificate to notify the FAA of a change of address within 30 days. We know the address on file with the FAA did not change since January 8, 2014. We also know that the property at that address belonged to Henriksen between 2011 and 2016. So Anderson could not have lived there after 6/24 of 2016. Why wasn't his address changed with the FAA within the 30-day window? 7. We know from the NTSB docket after the January 13, 2019 crash that killed Heidi that no records of any pilot pre-flight briefing were discovered. 14 CFR 91-103 requires that each pilot in command shall, before beginning a flight, become familiar with all available information, including weather reports, forecasts, fuel requirements, etc. 8. And in my opinion the biggest infraction of all, the issue of the FAA medical. False statements made by Anderson back in January 2014, neglecting to disclose his type 1 diabetes diagnosis from 2002 and his use of an insulin pump. 14 CFR 67313 means he should never have been flying for those 5 years with the third-class medical that he was issued with no waivers or limitations. 14 CFR 67403 outlines the penalty for fraudulent applications made to the FAA, and that is suspension or revocation of your certificates. FAA Regulation 14 CFR 6153 continues, a person may not act as pilot in command while that person knows or has any reason to know of a disqualifying medical condition or is taking a disqualifying medication. At the time of the crash, Anderson had violated this regulation every single flight he made, carrying passengers around by himself for 5 years. I was curious as to what the FAA had done about all these infractions that came to light following Anderson's plane crash on January 13, 2019, in which he killed Heidi. So I filed a FOIA request, that's a Freedom of Information Act request, with the FAA on August 1st, 2024. I received an answer on September 12, 2024. The results were shocking. On September 23rd of 2019, the FAA had revoked Anderson's combined student pilot cert and third-class medical for violating only one of the 8 infractions, that of carrying a passenger in violation of 14 CFR 6189A1. Why is this shocking? Among all that I have shared is the fact that the revocation took place on September 23rd of 2019. Anderson's combined student pilot certificate and Class 3 medical was issued January 8, 2014, which was good for 60 calendar months since he was 38 at the time, And doing the math, the certificate had already expired on January 31 of 2019, just 18 days after the crash that killed Heidi. Yet the FAA revoked it on September 23rd, 2019, 8 months after it had already expired. Stay tuned for episode 5. The wreckage speaks volumes, as aviation expert Cary Grant shares his take on the crash.